is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi.
Rob Reiner was 78 years old. His wife, Michele, was 68. And on Saturday night, December 13th, they brought their 32-year-old son to a Christmas party at Conan O'Brien's house because they needed to keep an eye on him. Let that just sink in for a quick second here. One of the most successful directors in Hollywood history, the guy who made The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, spent what would be the last night of his life functioning as a babysitter for his grown-ass adult son at a party full of A-list celebrities because that's what the system left him with. Not treatment options, not institutional support, not legal authority. And that's the key thing here, to intervene in his son's obvious mental health crisis. Just proximity, just being in the room, just hoping that his presence would be enough to keep things from going sideways. And it wasn't. And this is not a rich people problem, a poor people problem, a middle class, this problem and that problem. It's an every person problem when it comes to addiction. You can have all the resources in the world, and this case shows us that, and you still can't shield someone from their own demons if they don't want to get out of the hellscape. And there's nothing you can do in this country to force them to get the help and to be in a safe environment if they don't want it to be. You just get to sit there and wait for their ticking time bomb personality of a self to explode. Or you can abandon them and hope they just go die on the street, or get their shit together and come back and figure their shit out, or just keep doing the same cycle over and over and over and over until you die as a caregiver. Because there's nothing one can legally do when you see someone spiraling out of control, having a pattern of being out of control, being a danger to themselves or others, unless that's an imminent danger. In that moment, and even then, you get like a 72-hour hold. And then, well, he was in the corner for a little bit, put him in timeout, everything's going to be good. This is how we treat mental health crises in America and many other countries, I'm learning, as we've been covering this case and you guys have been reaching out. Let's talk about this. Nick Reiner spent that party acting erratically. And I'm sure he spent the days leading up to that party acting erratically. Allegedly staring at people, exhibiting what witnesses called antisocial behavior. At one point, he allegedly interrupted a private conversation involving Bill Hader. When Hader told him it was private, Nick reportedly stood there frozen, staring before storming off. And I said this in a short the other day. It has nothing to do with Bill Hader. He could have been talking to Snuggles the cat, and it would have had the same effect. When an addict and a mentally ill person is out for a fight, they're out to be the victim. And they're searching for someone to, quote, victimize them simply by maybe looking at them, maybe correcting them, maybe saying, hey, there's a boundary here. I'm having a conversation, a private one at that. They're looking for some reason to be the one that was pushed off, pushed away, so they can justify their own horrible behaviors and unhealthy ways of thinking. And yeah, and at the time, they're not aware they're doing it. That's part of the disease. That's part of the addiction. That's part of the mental illness. But just know, this has nothing to do with Bill Hader. It has nothing to do with how he was treated at a party. Simply being told, hey, private conversation. Thanks. Where most people will go, oh, my bad. Not this guy. So I want to make that clear. Whoever happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time when Nick wanted to become a victim would have been that random person. It doesn't matter. After that came the argument. Loud enough for the whole party to hear, allegedly. Rob and Michele left afterward. Less than 24 hours later, both of them were dead. Throat slit, multiple stab wounds found by their daughter, Romy, in their Brentwood home, which was still decorated for Christmas. Nick was arrested shortly thereafter. He's now being held without bail and charged with murder. And here's the thing that's going to haunt me about this case. Not just the violence, not just the brutality, but the sheer predictability of it. How everyone saw this coming. The family saw it. The friends saw it. Nick himself probably saw it. Michele had been telling people for months that she and Rob were at their wits' end. Her exact words, according to sources, we've tried everything. And they had. For 17 years, they tried everything. And their son, in our system, gave them nothing in return except the privilege of watching their son deteriorate while being legally prohibited from doing anything about it. This is the reality. And maybe you already know it, and maybe you already feel it, and you're like, yes, I've been screaming this forever, and no one seems to care. Well, let's try and use this as a learning moment, as an educational moment for everyone else out there who has somehow in their mind a rosy picture of when somebody is this bad, this struggling, this mentally ill, this addicted, that somehow there's this system that swoops in and you can keep them safe and protected from themselves and others, especially if you have a ton of money. The reality is, no, you don't. You may have all the money, but the system, this rosy-colored glasses view that somehow they will be protected from their own demons, does not exist. You can love that person quite literally to death. And there's nothing you can do to protect them or stop them. We don't allow for it because they have rights too. They have autonomy. While everyone else sits around watching the house burn. And they're screaming, put more fire on it. And you're like, well, really, we should probably use more water. Let's get some water. No, you're not allowed to use that hose over there. Well, why not? Because what if they want to take a sip from it? What if they want to have some delicious hose water? Well, we need to put the fire out. Well, they're drinking from the hose right now, so you better just let them have their sip. It's bureaucracy, it's ignorance, it's a blind desire to respect everyone's rights when we simply can't accept that there are some people in our society that don't deserve rights. They have forfeited those time and time again through their actions, through their illness, through their addiction, and at some point, the grown-ups in the room do need to step in and say, hey, you know, this freedom that you have to continue destroying your lives and everyone else who's around it, that needs to stop. And until you can start demonstrating that, you know, you're not going to do this, you're going to lose some of those privileges or rights. But we don't do that. We wait until this happens. And then, well, better lock them up. Yeah, maybe we should have done that a long time ago. Maybe some people are simply clear and present dangers to themselves and others, and we all know it, but we like to pretend and hope. They'll get better. This will work, that'll work. So, and when it doesn't, you end up babysitting your 32-year-old son at a black tie Christmas party while he's wearing a hoodie, offending people. And acting like a jackass. Nick Reiner's struggles started in his teens. He went to his first rehab program at 15. By the time he was 19, he'd cycled through 17 different treatment facilities. 17. He spent stretches of time homeless in Maine, New Jersey, Texas, sleeping on the streets, living in shelters, a kid from one of the wealthiest families in Hollywood, and he was out there on the concrete because the programs weren't working, and he didn't want to do the work or go back. In 2016, he told People magazine what it was like Quote, when I was out there, I could have died, he said. It's all luck. You roll the dice and you hope you make it. His parents knew the stakes. They knew everything they had going on here. They threw everything they had at the problem: money, connections, access to the best treatment programs in the country. They hired the experts. They followed the protocols. They did what they were told. And in 2015, Rob said something publicly that retrospectively, when you look at this, you go, God damn. The addiction had already won by 2015. It had convinced Rob and his wife that listening to doctors, listening to professionals was the wrong thing. That they should have been listening to their son all along, that would make it better. Addicts manipulate, addicts lie, addicts will tell you anything and try to get you to do anything for them. You be damned. You can die in the process, it don't matter, as long as they're getting what they want. That's the nature of addiction. That's the nature of certain mental illnesses. It just is what it is. It's not really up for debate. He said when Nick would tell us that it wasn't working for him, we wouldn't listen. And you know what? You shouldn't have. We were desperate, and because the people had diplomas on their wall, we listened to them when we should have been listening to our son. No, you should have never been listening to your addict son tell you that treatment is not working. It wasn't working. He chose not to make it work. Michele said something similar. We were so influenced by these people, they would tell us he's a liar, that he was trying to manipulate us, and we believed them. They were right. No amount of love, no amount of movie making, no amount of documentaries, no amount of let's pull him in here and try to connect. And I do not fault Rob for doing any of this. They were hitting walls everywhere with his son who refused to get the help, take the help, and do the work. And he manipulated his parents enough for them to think that his choice not to do those things was not the problem. It was the doctors that were telling him what they needed to do that was the problem. That is a successful manipulation by an addict. It is not shaming the victims here whatsoever. It is looking back at the documented history and calling it what it is. Let it be a cautionary tale for anyone out there who's dealing with an addict who is mentally ill in their life that is trying to be sold a bill of goods on how the treatment is the problem, not them. That quote has been circulating out there for the last several days as evidence of the Reiner self-awareness, their willingness to acknowledge mistakes. And look, that's true. It's good to take a look at things, and not every treatment program works. But 17, this is someone who didn't want to get help. There's another way to read this as an indictment of a system that gives families two options. You defer to the experts while hoping that the addict will go along with it, because that's the other key part of this. If the addict, the mentally ill person, doesn't want to participate, you can't force them to participate. So you kind of had to have two things going at once. Number one, you have to be able to afford it. Number two, the person that's getting the help needs to want it. And if they don't, you have to go it alone, because you can't force them. So they end up on the streets like he did. They tried that. Let him hit absolute rock bottom. Maybe that will wake him up. Maybe that will make something change. It didn't. Again, this is not something that can be solved with money, and this proves it. This is not something that can be solved with love, with tough love, with extra love, with making a movie, with relating, with connecting. This is something that either that addict will get the help they need or go down a path by their choice, or the way it sits right now, you basically wait for death and destruction. There used to be that middle ground. There used to be hospitals, mental health facilities that people like this would go to, would be forced to go to, didn't have a choice because the people around them cared enough and said, this is a dangerous person. Now, yes, we can go down the road of were some horrible, were they abused, were this, yes, there was horrible situations, and there was wonderful ones too. So to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, we've tried that in the past. We've tried a lot of things in the past. We can go back. We can revisit. We can do things better. I feel like at 2025, we could maybe retake this and do in a little more professional, educated, compassionate way than we did maybe 50, 60 years ago. Just saying. It might be a little more compassionate than watching people wither away on the streets, dying, raising children in tents. I don't know, just saying. The Reiners deferred. They initially trusted the programs. They believed the professionals. And when those specific programs didn't work, again and again, they felt that they were left with nothing but guilt and a son who was still sick. What were they supposed to do instead? Lock him in a room? Can't do that. He's an adult. And the law said he had the right to make his own decisions, even if those decisions were killing him, even if those decisions would eventually kill them. This isn't an indictment on the mental health system in America and what we like to pretend is passable and is okay and acceptable. This is how it works, and I'm using it. That term works in the loosest possible sense. If someone you love is mentally ill, addicted, psychotic, dangerous, all of the above, they check all the boxes, your options are essentially zero. You can beg them to get help, you can pay for treatment, you can drive them to the hospital, but unless they agree to go or unless they meet a very specific legal threshold, you cannot force them there. That threshold is imminent danger to self or others, and courts interpret that phrase as narrowly as possible. Your son is delusional? Not enough. Your daughter is using heroin? Not enough. Your husband is threatening violence? Well, unless he's making specific credible threats against specific people in that exact moment, probably not enough. In California, where the Reiners lived, you can get someone placed in a 5150 hold, involuntary psychiatric detention, but that lasts 72 hours max. 3 days. And trust me, after about 24 hours, most hospitals are like, how quick can we get this person out of here? Then they're released. Unless they meet that criteria all over again, and then the clock just starts up again. Over and over and over. How quickly can this person be healed? That's not how healing works. So families end up in this insane loop: crisis, hospital, hold, release, deterioration, crisis, hospital, hold, release, deterioration, over and over with no resolution, no long-term plan, and no meaningful intervention. The system isn't designed to treat mental illness. It's designed to manage liability. Hospitals don't want to hold patients longer than necessary. Courts don't want to violate civil liberties. Insurance companies don't want to pay for extended care, and families are left holding the bag, responsible for someone they have no legal authority over, no clinical training to help, and no institutional support to rely on. This is what the Reiners were living with for 17 years. The roots of this disaster go back to the 60s and the 70s when America decided to empty out its state psychiatric hospitals. This will work great, won't it? The intentions good. Some people thought the institutions had become warehouses, overcrowded, underfunded, rife with abuse. Patients were drugged into oblivion and left to rot. The civil rights movement rightfully demanded change. People with mental illnesses deserve dignity, and they do. But then, just as one system had gone so far this way, we swung it so far the other way. And we said, you deserve the rights of every single free American out there. Even though you can't handle that, you'll probably kill yourself or others along the way. But we're going to do this. So the hospitals closed. Between 1955 and 1994, the number of patients in state psychiatric facilities dropped from over 500,000 to under 70,000. They didn't take a look at the system and go, how can we do this better? They just said, we're closed for business. And what happened after that? Well, look to any street corner or tent community. They're about 12 generations in now. The plan was to replace institutional care with community mental health centers, outpatient treatment, supportive housing, wraparound services. What a lovely idea. And then they said, and you know who's going to pay for all this, communities? You know, where we used to take care of this on a state level or a federal level? Okay, now every individual community, you get to foot the bill for this. And all the communities said, we'll pass. We'll put something up that kind of looks like a mental health facility, but then it's really not going to be a mental health. It's going to kind of like, you know. So the funding never materialized, and the centers were never built, and the services never arrived. What we got instead was homelessness, incarceration, and families turned into unpaid psychiatric wards. Today, the largest mental health facilities in America are jails. Cook County Jail in Chicago, Rikers Island in New York, Los Angeles County Jail. That's where the mentally ill end up, or on the streets. Not because they're criminals sometimes, but because there's nowhere else for them to go. And the ones who don't end up in jail, they end up on the streets, or in emergency rooms, or in their parents' guest houses, getting high for days on end and punching holes in walls. Or in their basement, or in that extra bedroom, or maybe in the bedroom that the parents give the addict child while they sleep on the couch, because they're trying everything to make that addict comfortable and to get better, hoping that today isn't the day that their lives are stolen from them by a mad person. In 2018, Nick Reiner appeared on the podcast called Dopey. It's about addiction and recovery and describing being sequestered in his parents' guest house. Yes, sequestered. He talked about getting totally spun out on uppers, being awake for days and destroying the place, punching out the TV, smashing lamps, going off the rails, while his parents watched helplessly from the main house. What were they supposed to do? Call the cops on their son for property damage? It would get him $51.50 for the 100th time, only to have him released 72 hours later. The system had no answers. So Rob and Michele did the only thing they could. They managed. They monitored. They kept an eye on him. And they even started to believe the addiction and the bullshit that the addiction told his son to tell them, until they couldn't anymore. There's a philosophy behind the way we handle mental illness in this country, and it sounds reasonable until you actually see it in practice. The idea is autonomy. Every adult has the right to make their own decisions, including decisions about their own health care. You don't force treatment on someone just because you think they need it. That would be paternalistic, would violate their civil liberties. That would be a step back towards the bad old days of involuntary institutionalization. It sounds, lovely on paper until you actually interact with an addict or someone who's mentally ill and you go, oh, there's a reason there's these kind of structures and boundaries and barriers up. because they just blaze through them. They don't respect them. They don't care about them. They can't process how healthy individuals live. But here's the problem. When someone is in active psychosis or deep in addiction or experiencing a severe mental health crisis, their decision-making capacity, in case we didn't realize this, is a little compromised. It's not a moral judgment. It's neuroscience. The brain is not functioning correctly. They are not capable of making rational choices about their own care. This is where humanity should be stepping in, saying, we need to help you. But we've created laws that prevent us from being able to do that. The law treats them as if they are okay. A person whose cognition is severely impaired is given full legal authority over their own treatment. They can refuse medication, they can walk out of hospitals, they can reject every intervention their family tries to arrange. Meanwhile, the people who love them, who can see the deterioration, who live with the consequences, who are terrified of what's coming, have no legal standing whatsoever. The system prioritizes the autonomy of the sick over the safety and sanity of everyone around them. And families aren't caregivers in this framework. They are hostages. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. Hostages. Think about what that family and families in this situation actually experience. They walk on eggshells constantly, trying not to trigger an episode. They monitor behavior around the clock with no authority to intervene. They watch someone they love destroy themselves in slow motion and are told by a system that there's nothing to be done. The financial toll is staggering. Treatment programs, legal fees, property damage, lost income. The emotional toll? Well, that's priceless. Guilt, fear, exhaustion, isolation, the constant low-grade terror of waiting for the next crisis. And the physical danger is real too. They're living with someone who is unpredictable, someone who may become violent, someone who's already demonstrated that they are not in control. Rob Reiner was 78 years old. Michele was 68. They were not equipped to physically manage a 32-year-old man in crisis. No one that age is. But the system said it was their job. Actually, the system just said, good fucking luck. I'm out. Nick was an adult. Because Nick had rights, because forcing treatment would be wrong somehow. So they brought him to a Christmas party to keep an eye on him. Because that's all they were allowed to do. I want to address something that people don't like to say out loud. Not everyone can be saved. Not everyone can be saved. The mental health system operates on the assumption that recovery is always possible, that the right treatment, the right support, the right intervention, anyone can get better. That's a comforting belief. It's also not true. Some people are too sick. Some addictions are too entrenched. Some brains are too damaged. Some individuals will never achieve stability no matter how many resources are thrown at them. I'm not saying we shouldn't try. I'm not saying we should abandon people, but I am saying that the system's refusal to acknowledge this reality puts families in an impossible position. They're told to keep trying, to never give up, to believe that this program, this medication, this intervention will be the one that finally works. And when it doesn't, when the 17th rehab fails, just like the first 16, they're left with nothing but guilt and the question of what they did wrong when they didn't do anything wrong. The Reiners tried for 17 years. They had every resource available, money, connections, access, love. They made mistakes, sure. They've admitted as much, but they also did everything the system told them to do. And in the end, their son killed them, allegedly. At what point does a family have the right to protect themselves? At what point does endless patience become complicity in their own destruction? And at what point does the system's commitment to autonomy become a death sentence for the people trying to help? There are laws that could make a difference. Assisted outpatient treatment programs, court-ordered treatment for people who meet specific criteria. Kendra's Law in New York, Laura's Law in California. They allow judges to mandate treatment for individuals with a history of hospitalization, incarceration, or violence related to mental illness. They aren't exercised very often. Sometimes they work. The data shows reduced hospitalization, reduced homelessness, reduced incarceration, reduced violence, but they are chronically underfunded and underutilized because the mental health advocacy community has spent decades fighting against anything that smells like coercion. The concerns are legitimate. The history of psychiatric abuse is real. Racial disparities and involuntary commitments are documented. The potential for misuse certainly exists. But the current system isn't protecting anyone. It's not protecting the mentally ill who cycle through ERs and jails and end up dead on the streets. It's not protecting families who are left to manage impossible situations with no support, and it's not protecting the public who bear the consequences when untreated mental illness turns violent. We emptied the hospitals because they were inhumane, but we didn't replace them with anything better. We just shifted the burden onto families and called it freedom. I keep coming back to that image of Rob and Michele at that Christmas party. 78, 68, surrounded by celebrities trying to keep their son from making a scene. That was their Saturday night. That was their life. Not retirement, not grandchildren, not enjoying the fruits of a legendary career, just management, surveillance, damage control. They left the party after the argument, and we're learning more about the whereabouts of Nick after, as the days move on. And then their daughter found them dead. And she knew immediately who was responsible. She told the police her brother was dangerous and that he should be a suspect, allegedly. The family had known for years what Nick was capable of. They just couldn't do anything about it. Because the system said they couldn't. Because Nick had rights. Because autonomy matters more than outcomes. Rob Reiner directed some of the most beloved films of the last 50 years. He changed the ending of When Harry Met Sally because he believed in happy endings. He believed people could find their way to each other. He did not get a happy ending. Neither did Michele. Neither did Nick, really. Whatever happens to him now, his life is effectively over. The only people who win in this story are the ones who get to keep pretending the system works. The advocates who fight against involuntary treatment, the politicians who underfund mental health services, the hospitals that discharge patients after 72 hours because that's what the law requires. They'll move on to the next case, the next tragedy, the next family destroyed by a system that prioritizes philosophy over reality. And somewhere right now, another family is living the same nightmare, watching a loved one spiral, begging for help, being told there's nothing to be done, bringing their adult child to a social event just to keep an eye on them, because that's all the law allows. The Reiners had everything: money, access, connections, and love, and the system still failed them. And it will keep failing families until we admit the truth, that autonomy without capacity isn't freedom. It's abandonment. And forcing families to wait for tragedy isn't compassion, it's cowardice, dressed up as civil liberties. Rob and Michele Reiner deserve better. So does every family still trapped in this nightmare, waiting for a system that will never come to save them. Your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. I would love to see them. Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi is where you will find us. We do greatly appreciate those comments and your feedback. We do read them. So thank you in advance for that. And if you don't mind, Apple Podcasts, if you like what we're doing, leave us a review. We do greatly appreciate that as well. Until next time, my name is Tony Bruschi. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.